everyone. Ana Medeiros here. Max Gutman and David Jurman is here as well. We have been in a little break for a while, but we are back. Boa noite, Brasil. Mais uma vez estamos aqui, Ana Medeiros, Max Gutman and David Jurman is o nosso convidado de hoje à noite. So we're going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to give you a little bit briefing about what happened in Brazil right now. And this week on Wednesday, a person, a man, 38 years old man, a black man, was killed inside a police car by asphyxiation, you know, and he didn't commit any crime. And he's a person who suffered from schizophrenia, you know, as a person with a history of behavior mental health. I think David logged out. Uh, so it has been like a huge thing. A lot of people are asking for justice. So David, I was telling that this week on Wednesday, uh, a 38 years old black man was killed inside a police car by asphyxiation. You know, they opened the back of the car, the trunk, and put the man in the back, and tossed gas inside and closed the door. You could see only the legs of the man, and he's screaming. Detail there was no crime committed by this person. The reason he was arrested was just because he was not wearing the helmet, in the motorcycle. He has a history of behavior mental health. He has a schizophrenia, and his nephew, told the police that he was a little bit anxious because he has a behavior mental health. So it's normal for a person to be anxious, And he was asked why they were stopped. So the truth is, the video is in the internet. I have shared the Facebook. I have shared with a lot of other people here because there was literally he was gassed inside of a police car, and he was killed with many witnesses at the moment seeing it. So it was something that it really like we were talking about human rights with Professor Itai, and we were talking about that state should be accountable, and it's the obligation of state to protect people who especially people who can find themselves, that they cannot defend themselves, like in the case of Genivaldo is his name. So there was once the most gross and handled scenes or horrific that I could see, you know, that like, so I want to hear, I will, I would like to, let's start, David. Uh, I would like for you to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about yourself to, you know, that people can know. And I will try to translate a little bit as you speak for the Brazilian population, for the Brazilian people. Can you hear, David?
Anna, it kind of cut in and out. I apologize.
Oh, all right. So I was saying, please introduce yourself, tell who you are, um, and I will try to translate a little bit the conversation that we have into Portuguese, or I can do a summarization
Okay.
after you speak.
Okay. Anna, thank you so much for having me on the show here tonight. I'm a master's program student at the City University of New York at the John Jay campus in the Masters of Human Rights program. What drew me to the program was my interest in social action work. My particular interest is anti-hunger work, and I've been involved with that many years on a volunteer basis in the New York and New Jersey area. And this is an extension of that. And what also interests me in terms of human rights is the interdisciplinary nature of the field, the fact that it draws from so many different fields, whether it's political science, sociology, economics, criminal justice. And I think that certainly, although we're nowhere near where we want to be as a society, at least we've got some kind of basis, some kind of jumping off point with the Declaration of Universal Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, excuse me, as a jumping point, which is a centerpiece of a lot of the courses that are taught in the program in terms of how human rights is viewed and what the ultimate goal is. So it's a program that I've very much enjoyed being part of, and look forward to continuing to take more courses in.
So David saying that he, he's currently faz o mestrado de Direitos Humanos, o mesmo que eu estou fazendo no John Jay, é a Universidade do Estado de Nova York. Nós dois somos colegas de classe. E ele é apaixonado pelos direitos humanos. Ele fala que uma das maiores paixões dele é combate à fome, né? Apesar dele estar interessado em ciências sociais, em ciências humanitárias, mas uma das paixões é o combate à fome, e que ele tem estado envolvido em vários programas. Mas também ele também fala que, como sociedade e em reflexão em relação aos direitos humanos, nós ainda não estamos aonde deveríamos estar, mas que o que podemos fazer é continuar, né, essa luta e essa batalha. So, David and Max, let me try. I don't know if you both heard what I was saying about the violation of human rights, and David spoke about the Declaration of Human Rights. So, you as a behavioral mental health person, a clinician, Dave and I, we as a human rights student. So the case that I present today, the Genivaldo. So what can we draw from what happened with the action? Because this was supposed to be, the law enforcement is supposed to protect people, not to torture them and to gas them inside of a mobile gas camera. So what can you both of you can be what can you tell what would be your insight about that? Go ahead, Max.
Well, it's funny because you framed it in terms of my being a clinician, but it really, my response comes right from my lived experience. I think I shared on this program, it wasn't just about a year ago. I was in upstate New York, and I had medication out of the bottle prescribed to me, and I was taken out of my vehicle and threatened to be arrested, and a taser held to my head while I'm screaming, what's going on here? What's going on here? And they threatened to kill me, and all I was a routine stop, and medication out of the bottle that was prescribed, and they knew I had a history of schizophrenia, and it got out of hand, very out of hand, to the point where I was so afraid that I must have said something that triggered a psych eval right after I got out of the police station, and I went through that process. But it reminds me when I'm hearing your story of how encounters with people with severe mental health disorders can get very out of hand when people don't either have the right training, the right skill set, or understanding of what's going on in front of them. I mean, people can seem very agitated, but with a few, soothing words, some verbal reassurance, the right skill executed, you'd be surprised how fast the person will calm down and not require such inhumane treatment. I've never heard of such a thing, being thrown into the back of a vehicle, and having gas. Gas. It sounds like warfare.
It sounds like the Holocaust.
Yeah, it does. I wanted to say that, but I didn't. It does sound like the Holocaust.
That's what people say in Brazil right now.
With people with lived experience, with people with mental health disorders, it's a Holocaust for people with mental health diagnoses, and that's abominable. It's an injustice that needs.
It's a gross violation of human rights.
Yes, it is.
So Max is saying that he did have an experience with encounter with the police. Ele falou que teve também uma experiência quando ele estava saindo de um estado para o outro, que ele estava com medicamento, ele também teve um encontro desagradável com a polícia aqui e acabou, foi parando na delegacia, né? E ele tinha os remédios, ele mostrava os remédios que ele tinha, mas levaram ele lá para a delegacia para explicação, né? Então, ele fala que é uma falta de preparo, é uma falta até mesmo de humanidade fazer isso. Ele nunca ouviu falar que matasse alguém num carro, num camburão de trás no polícia e botasse gás. Ele não queria falar a palavra holocausto, né? Mas eu falei que é o que os brasileiros estão falando sobre isso, que parece que é uma coisa nazista, fazer isso com uma pessoa que tem problemas de saúde, e não somente violação de direitos humanos, mas também uma coisa que uma falta de preparo que está tendo, né? Tratando a população que tem problemas de saúde mental dessa forma, né? So what people are saying in Brazil and said that there's a strong racism. It has to do with racism. It has to do with class.
Mm-hmm.
It has to do with not understanding a person with behavioral mental health, because Genivaldo, he was medicated. He even had some medication with him. It was shown to them that he had the medication. That's when he got a little bit nervous, and they supposed to gas him in the closed trunk in the car, supposed to calm him down.
What? That's a technique? I never heard of that.
That's what I have been reading, that it was supposed to calm him down.
I've never heard of that technique.
So by the time they took him to the hospital, he was dead.
That's not a technique. That's nothing I've ever heard of as a clinician. Gassing someone. I understand oral medication, maybe an anti-anxiety medication, talk therapy, whatever. But I never heard of gassing somebody.
You actually could see, if you see the video, you can see the smoke come out of, and his leg was just moving, and they would try to hold his leg. You could see only his leg. So it is. I was shocked to see that, and I cannot like be silent in good conscience, because we are human beings, regardless his behavioral mental health condition. He's a human person. You should not look at the illness, but as a person. So David, you never heard something like that happen before, right? I never heard it. That's the first time I saw, and I was
Yes.
I was like really sad when I saw it. I was speechless.
Well, I think it points to a couple.
Go ahead.
I think it points to a couple things. I can't speak for Brazil, but I can certainly speak for the United States, that we're still woefully underfunding mental health treatment in this country. And I think it's truly a global problem as well.
Yes,
we do, I think, a very good job in terms of physical ailments, but in terms of mental health, we've got a long way to go. And I think also in terms of the handling of situations like this, we woefully undertrain people in authority in terms of police and others in how to deal with people like that. And using force is not the way to handle it. There's other ways that are much more humane and much more effective that can be done, but the training isn't there as well, too. And I think that's another major problem that has to be addressed.
So the training, it's what it's missing there, because it is very strange. If you had a training that you know how to deal with a person, for example, we know how to deal with a person. Like I work in the behavioral mental health, Max is a clinician. We know when we talk to a person that we see that he or she, they're agitated, we know how to deal with them. We know how to accommodate them, how to calm them down. So, Dave está dizendo que aqui nos Estados Unidos também nós estamos um pouco ainda atrasados, né, em termos de saúde mental e investimentos financeiros, né? Mas em comparação ao Brasil e outro país, estamos um pouco mais adiantados. Então, tem essa comparação. Os Estados Unidos pode parecer um pouco avançado no termo de educar as pessoas sobre saúde mental, sobre como lidar, sobre como cuidar, como a polícia, né, tem treinamentos, e ele está falando que está faltando treinamento, né, ensinar em treinamento para a força policial de como atuar e lidar com pessoas que sofrem com problema de saúde mental. Então, this is one of the problems that it really worries me, because in addition to be a social political problem, it is also about humanity. It's also about, how can you address this problem? How can you approach this problem in a way that people can understand? There is no difference between a person who has a behavioral mental health or a person who does not have a behavioral mental health.
But Adam, when is that ever okay to put someone in the back of a vehicle and gas them? When is that ever okay? And, even before I was a clinician, even when I was 10, 12 years old or 15, at any time of my life, that never would seem like a good plan. That never would seem like it's okay. It seems over the top, militaristic, and inhumane. And I could never imagine that ever being okay to do.
It was dehumanized. It was dehumanized. It was, but what we are talking about here is a racism. There is a difference the way you get treated.
Yes.
If you are black, poor, and in addition to poverty and your skin color, you have a behavioral mental health condition, then it makes worse. You suffer multiple discrimination.
Yes.
In addition to the racism, the classism in Brazil, that's what is happening right now. What if Genivaldo was a person, light skin, from a middle class, that would not have happened to him.
Mm-hmm.
So we do, right? We do.
Yes. If that person was a well-to-do person, that police officer would have been sued and there would have been recourse. But because this person was economically disadvantaged, because this person has mental issues, not their fault, they've got no recourse. And that's where the inhumanity lies in the situation.
Is that our Professor Taiwan said in class that human rights? Oh, sorry, the camera. That human rights in the beginning it was when there was first in the beginning of humanity history, that human rights was applied to certain class and groups. It was not applied to everyone.
Yes.
So what I could draw from this experience that I saw with Genivaldo is that human rights is like rights. I don't even say human rights, I say rights. It has been applied only to certain group, to certain people.
Well, American history is an example of that. The Declaration of Independence, considered one of the great documents in Western history, talked about all men being created equal, but the key word there was men. It did not say women. And certainly when you said men, it only included white men. So you had for centuries women second-class citizens. You had slavery in this country. You had people treated as second-class citizens for a good chunk of American history, which certainly is a blemish in terms of studying the history of human rights, and also points to exactly what you're saying, Anna.
It is true, David and Max. We do have in American history, we do have that kind of blemish that when rights the first was created, it state men, it did not state minority, it did not state women, women's right. But the good thing is that human rights in American and in other countries in Europe, it has evolved. And we can see in Europe that human rights has evolved and also have enforcement, which we can't say the same thing in Latin America and Brazil. No, we cannot say that human rights in Brazil has been enforced, has been evolved in the way that we have been seeing constantly. Minorities suffer great violence. We cannot say that. The rights are there, the state signed the obligation, but it is not happening because this kind of crime, it has been taking place, is done by government institutions, government organization, institution that is the very institution that is supposed to protect and secure the citizens' right.
Anna, just a question in terms of Brazil, and I hope I'm not going off track here, but
Mhm.
in the early 21st century, political economists talked about, in terms of the world economy, the growth of the BRIC nations,
Mhm.
Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And there was a
Yes.
lot of hope and a lot of excitement in terms of those countries. And specifically, you're talking about Brazil, the fact that their economy was growing rapidly. And
They
we
weren't doing well.
with a growing economy, then hopefully becomes more of a distribution of wealth equally and so forth. And it lifts the entire country, all people of all classes. What happened? You don't hear that term brick anymore, and from what you're telling me, there's still severe human rights problems that are going on in 2022 in Brazil,
What
despite this great movement that started in the early 21st century
like
economically.
I can respond that in a short as like Max and I we have been talking about that the regression of rights, that's what is happening. That with economy, people get wealth, people demands more rights, demands participation in civil society. And yes, there was a growth with the BRIC, and Brazil was growing. Even the middle class and people who live in poverty was able to get into higher education school. But that is starting kind of going backward after all this administration and the far right started getting really much involved, and it started like everything started like crumbling. Now the country is in poverty. There's 17 million people without jobs. I think 19 live in poverty, and people are on lines like waiting to get bone to eat. The best meat is sent to other countries, and the bone people are scavenging the trash for food. That's the reality now. Like the truth. So all that break, nobody talks about that anymore. But it was growing. It was actually it was a period that people was not in so much poverty as it now. Now it is extremely the society has become extremely violent, has become extremely racist, classist, and other, and it is very hard, and especially now minorities are the ones that suffer the most violence. Blacks, women, people with behavioral mental health, people with history of substance misuse. So it's like you have no words to explain how, because it's too much going on. You remember when what happened in the country, but finally we got the country back, and it started thing got back on tracks slowly, and it's still much to do. Brazil is very chaotic, and human rights is like it's not there, and some of the crimes are seen as normalized. And so I use this space like to bring people on, and people to talk about, and so that people can, whoever watch us, they see that there is a way, there is a way. Training, information, share of information, share of experience. You don't need to use violence. You don't need to do that to a person, gas a person in the trunk of a car. There was two type of different gas. You, so to me, what is missing there, in addition to a conscience, is training, but also they need to do like a whole reformation in the system, and that's not right. This is not right.
Hmm.
You can treat people like that. Like we have many social movements here in America. Other social movements, we spoke about it. In the 80s, we had the Young Lords, we have the Latin Kings, we had the Black Panther, we have when they were talking about the Rockefeller's dog laws. So we have all the civil society, the participation, but we need to have a strong conscience. We have to educate the population. We have to educate it. This is not right. You cannot treat people like that. Is that thing that Professor Itai always says, that human rights start with dignity, with the worth of human person, right? That is the same for the behavioral mental health. Marx and I, we work in the behavioral mental health. We treat people with behavioral mental health, regardless of the forensic background, with dignity, with respect, recognize the humanity of a person. And that, I think, that's what is missing, that people are not able to recognize the humanity. So what would you say? You live in America, you never been in Brazil. But hey, maybe someday you can visit David Brazil when things get better. What about you, Max?
Well, I always want to visit Brazil, but I'd like to visit under good terms, right? And to see
Where they safe?
when it's safe, and see things moving in the right direction, visibly, and and yeah, it's we live in a difficult time. Things are moving faster in some spaces than others. People aren't questioning why, and
Mm-hmm.
and I think we're moving towards generally progress, but people are seeing progress, experiencing progress differently, because of race, gender, all these different reasons, and there needs to be a flattening, just a great egalitarian flattening where everyone is treated the same way, and we have a idea of what progress is and where we want to go, right? Sorry, where we want to go, unilaterally. There has to be agreed upon idea of what good mental health is, and what humane treatment is. Until we get there, there's always going to be disparities, and people are always going to question why. And I'd like to see those questions answered.
I'm
Yeah,
curious
Max.
in terms of the awareness in Brazil of the issues you talk about. Certainly here in the United States, even maybe more so now than ever because of the presence of social media, we find out about things instantaneously and everyone hears about it. But I'm curious, is the general population aware of these human rights abuses that are going on in Brazil? Because I think awareness is a very important part of getting action going, to have a population to really get motivated about something. They need to be aware of it. And that wasn't always the case, even in the United States, in terms of a lot of issues. I'm just curious, in Brazil, are people aware, the general populace, in terms of what's going on right now there?
Yes, they are, but they are aware about what is going on, and there are some social groups, groups that you have, groups that have uh, written a statement that they cannot accept this kind of treatment of a person in a state of vulnerability. They are great awareness right now in the society, and people are talking a lot about it, and they are like a kind of pushback. But the government machine, it's so strong that when you try to push back, they try to pull you, they try to do the same thing. So it has been a constant struggle. Especially now, it's going to be in a year that an election and the social movement is fighting for human rights, is fighting for the right of people with behavioral mental health, is fighting for the right of people with substance misuse. I need to remember you. I don't know if you both of you know, but in Brazil, a person who has a history of behavior of substance misuse is still very much criminalized. It is treated as a criminal. It's not treated as a person who needs treatment, and that's right now is a huge problem.
Mhm.
That all this the prison system is get filled up.
Mhm.
So it is a huge, I would say, it's a huge social problem. You, Today I was talking to someone and I said the problem with substance misuse in Brazil, it is not a problem for law enforcement. It's a problem, it's a social problem that needs to have people well trained to take care of this. So eu estou falando um pouco sobre, falando para David, Max, que o problema da dependência química no Brasil não é visto como um problema médico, não é visto de um problema como pessoas que precisam de cuidados, que ainda é muito criminalizada. As pessoas que usam dependência química no país são vistas como marginais. Então, não é o caso nos Estados Unidos, né? Aqui é tratado como um problema de saúde que precisa de cuidados, de tratamento. E Max e Dave acham assim, meio estranho, porque né, a criminalização aqui nos anos 80 e 1973 também nós tínhamos law que criminalizava, mas isso mudou quando começou a afetar a classe alta média. I was explaining a little bit what we were talking about, how it's very unreal to treat people with behavioral mental health and the criminalization of people who has a history of substance misuse. It is huge, the criminalization, and in these lines, a lot of people have lost their life. They are forcing inside the institution for treatment. Inside the institution, they get killed, they get abused. Some of them, they once they place there, they don't get out of these institutions alive. the, but it has become a huge machine of money making, these institutions now, that most of them belong to powerful people. So it's very complex issue. Human rights in Brazil, people with behavioral mental health rights, substance misuse. Right now, it's a very complex issue because there is a group that has a lot to gain, and there is a group that has a lot to lose. So they are the haves and the have not. The haves only gains, and the have nots even lose their lives. It's very complex. So to have you guys here and talking about this, it really helps me, and helps that people can see what we're talking about. There is awareness, but awareness itself, it's not enough.
I think there are two things that can be done, Anna. Number one is the Catholic Church wields a lot of power and influence in Brazil. And the Catholic Church has always been a faith, as other faiths are, but certainly they put human rights very much front and center. Social action is very much part of the Catholic tradition. And I'm sure they're speaking up about it, but I would hope that on a global scale at the Vatican level, that this would be talked about, because obviously that could, put an international spotlight on what's going on in Brazil. Number two is that I think that there are certain things that trading partners can do to put pressure on Brazil to improve their human rights by penalizing them in terms of trade or economic activity with them until they improve what's going on with their human rights, is another action that could be taken as well too. So certainly there is some things that can be done, but it's going to take some action amongst international organizations to affect this kind of change.
I agree. So David está falando que Existem coisas que podem ser feitas, como a Igreja Católica é uma organização com muita influência. Então, esse problema dos direitos, de violações de direitos humanos da minoria, deve ser uma campanha internacional que as pessoas vejam o que está acontecendo com os grupos minoritários no país. A segunda sugestão é que os direitos humanos, né, que o Brasil seja sancionado, né, por essas violações e tem um acompanhamento, né, das organizações internacionais humanitárias, porque esse tipo de coisa não pode continuar acontecendo. I don't know what happened to Max. I think he got probably cut off the connection. David, you're right. The Catholic Church is very influential, and I do know that they do work internally in the country, domestically, especially in São Paulo. They are pushing back even for social policy to help like the unhousing population, the minorities, but it hasn't been enough because the people who are in power, they are extremely influential, and it has been like a constant struggle. So if we don't speak up, and if you don't start educating people, especially people who doesn't have any political power, influence, like money that they can they can be heard, we need to educating people about their rights, because in Brazil we still have a lot of people, they don't know what their rights are. So we have to remember, you know what your rights are when you learn what your rights are. You can demand a right that
Yes.
you don't know what they are. And that is what I think it's what's happened a lot now. You have to say you have the right to be treated as a human being. Human rights is a relationship between state and citizen, which we are not seeing this relationship.
Mm-hmm.
There's all kind of
One of the
violation.
things One of the things that's special about the class is not only do I learn from the teacher, but I learn from my fellow students. And Anna has taught me a lot in the class. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't really be aware of these issues that are going on in Brazil. And that's one of the wonderful things about the course is I'm now, as you say, education is key. I'm now educated more about it. And what it says to me is that the United States as a country has to do much more to support Brazil in terms of this fight for human rights. We seem to do a lot for countries over in Europe and even in
Yes.
Asia, but Brazil is right in our own backyard. It's in our hemisphere. We should certainly be supporting every country in the world, but I think particularly we owe a debt of support to those countries that are closest to us, that are part of our hemisphere. And Brazil is one of those countries. So certainly this should become a much more important issue in terms of American foreign policy than it is too. And I think if that becomes a priority, hopefully some change can be affected as well. But I've
And
learned a
human
lot
rights
from you, Anna.
protection.
I'm
And
sorry?
human rights protection.
Yes.
You must guarantee and protect human rights. I agree. Actually, U.S. have a military base in Brazil. They have a military base there. So why not reinforce the human rights there? Why not help the people without? When it is that old say that when the state does not protect their citizen, it is the responsibility of the international community to guarantee those rights. Right?
And
You all
Brazil's a
agree
very
with me?
important country. It's one of the 10 largest nations in the world. It's one of the most populated nations in the world. It's a country that, as I was mentioning before, with the development of the BRIC nations, was a rapidly growing economy, becoming
It was.
a much more central part of the global economy. So even from those practical reasons, it demands more attention and more support in terms of these issues that the country is facing right now, because it sounds like Brazil's at a very critical juncture right now in terms of
Very.
where it's going to go in the next 20 years. And inaction is going to only make things worse.
It's very critical. And I read in an article last year that said that Brazil, to get out of poverty and misery that they were now, it will take 10 years to go
And that's
back.
inexcusable.
It will
And
take 10
that's
years.
inexcusable. That should not be happening in the year 2022. That should not be happening.
So we are almost the conversation is really good, but we are out of time. So I want to hear what would be, you gave a lot of insight, David, and we did learn about a lot. I also learned a lot about Tibet as you spoke in the class. Uh, what would be your last consideration for tonight, David? And then I'll pass to Max. What would be your last consideration with all this confusion, all this uh, uh, going on in Brazil in every scale, in every level right now? The criminalization of the minorities.
I'll start, and I will say I think part of the issue also is the leadership in the country, and one hopes that the leadership will change. A lot of change is obviously affected by what happens at the top, and I think right now Brazil's facing a very dire situation in terms of the leadership. So we can only hope that things will change in electoral politics in Brazil. That will certainly affect change. As I mentioned before, I think that it's just so important that the world community take much more of an active interest in terms of what's going on here to hopefully do what they can to support those forces in Brazil that are fighting for the human rights that are so well deserved by everyone in that country in the face of racism, sexism, economic depravity that's happening in the country. All these
Yes.
issues are huge consequence right now.
When there is no economic growth, there is no human rights. So
Absolutely.
there is no human rights. So David is saying that hopes that Brazil gets better with new leadership. The current leadership is not the country is not doing well. Hopefully, in the near future, the better leadership, it will help. It will give people more rights. It will have reinforce the human rights. So it basically it needs to change, and these deviant, violent behavior cannot be accepted. So, David está falando que os direitos humanos, que o Brasil agora, a liderança do país agora, espera que mude com a liderança melhor, que o Brasil, que o país possa se levantar, né, com uma bela liderança, porque a atual liderança não está fazendo muito pela população. Thank you, David. So, Max, what would be your last consideration for tonight?
It's interesting. You were able to say there's a military base there, right?
Yes.
I think that a lot of this comes down to transparency and accountability. We need to be able to look at maps and figures from global organizations like World Health and others that can look at figures and say, okay, there's a military base there, but also where are we at with this human rights issue and that human rights issue, and be able to trace it and be transparent about it and locate where the deficiencies are and be able to supplement them and augment them with real change and have devices in place that have teeth other than the UN or including the UN to go in and do something about it. Until we can locate and map out and identify where the weak points are, no one's going to be able to do anything about it. And like I said, you're able to specify there's a military base there. Well, where are we on all these other issues and what can be done about it? And who is that party? And until they're charged with the obligation of rectifying these injustices, I think it's going to be a long way to go.
So, eu falei para o Max as últimas considerações para esta noite, ele falando que, né, tem que mapear, ver onde está, porque os Estados Unidos têm uma base militar em Alcântara, no estado do Maranhão, e tem uma boa relação com os Estados Unidos, então os Estados Unidos tá em condições de verificar as violações de direitos humanos, de reforçar e ver, vamos ver o que a gente pode fazer, a gente pode, né, aconselhar o que funciona para nós, como diminuir essas violações, essas violências contra os grupos minoritários, né? E tem outras formas também econômicas de limitar o país a esse tipo de violência, né? Então, it was a great conversation. It was a great debate. I appreciate. I want to thank you, David, my classmate, for being here. I want to thank you, Max. It's always good to have you here, Max.
Thank you.
Obrigada. Eu quero agradecer o David Durman, meu colega de classe, por estar aqui com a gente hoje. É um prazer tê-lo aqui. E o Max Gutman também. Então, eu agradeço. Uma boa noite para todos. Good evening, American. Until next time.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Good night. And we're still on. What happened? Professor Marcelo, are you there? Hey, we're still on. We are not in the air anymore. Now we can talk all kind of things.
Funny.
No, when you are not in the air, we can talk about anything. But seriously, it has been like, if you're not a violent person, but when you see this kind of things, you become very agitated. You become like very conscious about your fragility as a human being, you know.
Yeah.
And you become even angry, enraged. I'm not a violent person, but when I saw that, I felt like I would beat up those guys. Like 3 guys against one? It's insane. So it was like, I really have no words. It was amazing to have you all here.
Thank
It was
you.
really nice.
Well, thank you, Anna. You know, something that's just obviously been on my mind this week. I know the show is for Brazil and targeted for Brazil, but I think when you're talking about human rights, you have to be talking about what's going on in the United States in the last 2 weeks with the mass killings. And
Yes.
I say it from a human rights perspective because there's a group of people in this country who believe that is their human right under any circumstance to have a firearm. And I got this very chilling statistic that I just heard on the show Washington Week in terms of the number of mass shootings in developed countries from 1998 to 2019. Number 2 on the list at 8 is France. 3 is Germany at 5. 4 is Canada with 4. 5 is Finland with 3. Brazil's not even on here in terms of mass shootings in developed countries from 1990 to 2019, but France is second in the number of mass shootings in that 21-year period at 8. The United States is at number 1 with 101 mass shootings.
Oh my God. I never look at those statistics.
I was absolutely, in a certain sense, it doesn't shock me because of the way our gun laws are in this country. On the other hand, though, the number is absolutely appalling and absolutely shocking. And I see it from the standpoint of you started off talking about mental health, and this is another mental health issue because when you look at these mass shootings, it's a product of mental health issues.
It is.
That are these causes for these, certainly in the case of Buffalo and in Texas this past week. But when I saw that number, it was just very, very staggering. And I look at it, like I said, in terms of human rights too, because until we've got stricter gun control laws in this country, that 101 number will be 102 in short order.
But you all know, both of you know that gun, there's a lot of people behind that making money.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. The gun manufacturers in the last 3 years have had record profits, have done
Exactly.
incredibly well. Yes.
That's what it motivates people. That is the same problem in Brazil. They have
Mhm.
this idea that guns now should be liberated to everyone. It's the same thing that people with behavioral mental health and substance misuse should be locked up and the key should be tossed away. Why? Because there is money to be made on the cost of the suffering of this population.
Mhm.
There's only a small group, an elite group, who would be making money while these people would suffer and die inside this institution. It's about when you said economically, it's about profit. It's not about the human rights. It's not about the law. It's not about to care about people. I remember one thing that Itai said, that we need to get people to care, which is very hard when involves profit. When they involve economic gain, it is difficult. Even American, it is difficult to do that. You know, like we have been had
The
shooting in New York. We had what, two, three? We had a shoot in New York. Two shoot. We had one in the
two
Buffalo.
shootings in New
Two
York and the
shooting in New
subway.
York. We had one in Chicago.
Mhm.
We had the one in school. So it's like very close. The like date is like it's not that far from one shooting for the other. So, but these are the people that are extreme. They believe that you have the rights, is a human rights. You can have. So we have too much rights, and other countries they have no rights at all.
Right. Well, I
Right?
argue that part of the problem in this country is, in a certain sense, we
Hey,
still
here's
have a ways to
Professor
go in terms
Marcelo.
of human rights. But at the same token, though, I argue that we're a country in many respects that is too free. And I say it from the standpoint of gun laws. And also, if you look at the way that the United States handled the COVID-19 situation, that's a
Oh,
prime case in point of too much freedom. Why? Because people in certain parts of the country, I don't need to wear a mask. I don't need to get vaccinated. It's my right to not do that. And the end result is by far, the United States had the highest death rate in the world, in the industrialized world of any nation in the world. And that was in part because of that attitude of that policy. People thinking about themselves versus the greater good. And that's what the whole gun control thing is. It's people thinking about themselves, and I demand the right to have a gun. And to what your point also is about the economic aspect of it as well. And that's more important than the greater good, which is what the human right aspect is. The human rights about what's good for the greater good of people and the greater good of the individual.
and the greater good of society, how the society function,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and but
Exactly.
how the society function. But in this case, we had too much rights. My point is that Brazil is like we have no rights at all. So
Mm-hmm.
here we had a lot of rights. So I use mask if I want to, but when things got really tight, that people start really die, nearly like 900 people die. So people started getting, no, we're gonna wear the mask. Let's go with conscience. So there is a conscience, is awareness about rights, human rights in America. Things that we don't have this conscience in Brazil, because in Brazil the idea is that human rights is basically only used to protect criminals, which is the
Mm-hmm.
wrong perception, the wrong idea. That's what we want to break, this wrong idea. Professor Marcelo can speak more because he's a lawyer in Brazil. That's
Hi,
Professor
Good
Professor.
Marcelo.
evening.
How are you?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Mr. David.
Thank
Max,
you.
great pleasure talking to you again. Ana, minha amiga de sempre. Good evening to you. The show tonight was terrific, was marvelous, was amazing. It was a really classroom to all Americans and Brazilians about all points treated. It was very good, very good. I
Thank you.
try to enter here in the finish only to congratulate you and say good night and say that you are very well. very well.
All right. So we say
Thank
good
you.
night.
Thank you, everyone.
David, this space is yours. Whenever you want to come, and if you have like a topic, or if you think, hey, and I got something cool, someone who wants to talk about, and it can be a good thing to help Brazil, because Brazil is learning. Brazil is learning
Yes.
now about human rights. Is learn about behavioral mental health. Is learn about how they are not there yet. How to learn how to deal with the population with substance misuse, like we have been doing American, but they will learn. And I think this space here, and with people with different, experience, a set of mind that is open mind, that is about humanity, about empathy, and then can help, you can bring to the show.
Well,
And
I'd love to come back again. So thank you for having me tonight. I really appreciate it. It was a pleasure meeting all of you online.
we're gonna be in class anyways.
Yes, of course. Absolutely.
So good night.
Good night.
A big hug to you
Good
all.
night,
Take
everyone.
care.
Good night.
Be well.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye bye. Good night.
bye.
Bye bye.